Greetings, Starfighters. Same room, different setup. Kind of working around here, trying to see if I can find a way to deal with that little popping noise that's been a problem in the last several episodes. I imagine that's contributing to the, unfortunately, declining average view count. It has literally been more than a year. No, wait, sorry, no. This June will mark 1 year since any episode of Shameless Cashgrab has cracked has done more than like 50 views, and that was for Swamp Shark, which it was up to like 75, I think, last time I looked. But anyway, yeah, we're still in season 7, and our next movie is the Fairy King of R, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode. Although, if this is your first, you wouldn't know that. And Malcolm McDowell is in this one, noted character actor, usually good in whatever he's in, even if what he's in is otherwise shit. And then we've also, unfortunately, got Corbin Burnson. Now, you might be surprised that I'm so uncomfortable about that, given people who know me know that Psych is one of my all-time favorite shows, and Corbin Burnson played Sean's father on that show. Unfortunately, I learned a little something about the guy after Psych went off the air, and I think after the first Psych movie. My father told me about this before he died in 2016. He'd read Claudia Christian's autobiography, and okay, I'm gonna have my editor / mom put a timestamp somewhere here, generally speaking, about where to skip to, so you don't have to hear what I'm about to tell you about this guy and why I am not particularly looking forward to this movie. All right. Earlier in her career, I forget exactly where, I didn't have the chance to read the autobiography myself, but my dad read it, and Film Brain actually referenced this when he was reading it on Twitter, so two independent sources, it confirmed that she said this. They were in a movie together, and for a scene they were in bed together. And while they were in bed together, Burnson took care of himself under the blanket and then proceeded to show Claudia Christian the result. Ew. So, yeah. I don't blame anybody who skipped all of that. So, those of you who unfortunately did decide to stay for that bit of information, or those who might have unless you already knew it, like if you read Claudia Christian's autobiography. But yeah, the Fairy King of R, everybody. Let's watch this and hope that Malcolm McDowell can at least make it watchable. Alright, so I have now watched The Fairy King of R from 1998. And just to get out ahead of things, yes, I am aware that the Riff Tracks version of the movie is available in its entirety on YouTube. I didn't find out about that until after I wrote this script, so I haven't had a chance to check that out yet. Anyway, our plot summary comes to us from Letterboxd again. When Kyle and Evie Preston start exploring the grounds of their late grandmother's house, they discover an old abandoned mine shaft and soon find that the old lady's stories about fairies trapped underground were true. Imprisoned many years ago by two battling giants, the fairies now risk being lost forever unless Kyle and Evie can find a way to help them. The task becomes even more urgent when the children's father is taken ill and they need the fairies to cure him with their magic. We open on a book being opened by a fairy that contains the movie's title. The book, not the... A narration by the soon-to-be late grandmother from the summary. For the record, the CG on display in at least this sequence is somewhat better than the CG in some of the previous movies in the set, even though those movies were made after this one. And apparently R is the name of the Fairy King. The title had led me to believe the land he was from was named R. Am I the only one who takes issue with the grammar here, or am I just being a pedantic asshole? I mean, I'm usually a pedantic asshole, but I'm being specific here. Anyway, this sequence, which is the grandmother telling the story of R, while the credits play over the pages of the book, is actually fine. This is a perfectly acceptable way to handle exposition, at least for a movie geared towards a younger audience. So we're off to a decent start here, and that actually has me worried. This is Paul Matthews we're talking about here. The guy couldn't make Rick Mayall as Merlin work. Starting out on a high note here just means the movie has that much farther to fall. I might have spoke too soon about the CG. We see another fairy in the first scene after the credits, with the grandma reading to the kids and all that, and it looks about on par with the music video for Eiffel 65's Blue. This is also where we are introduced to the child characters and their parents in pretty much the same way we've been introduced to most children and parents in these movies, while driving a car. I think The Magic Door and Dazzle are the only exceptions so far. One big difference, though, is these parents and children seem to be getting along perfectly well. That's a new one for this season. Expository dialogue says this house had belonged to the grandmother and that she hadn't been back to it in 40 years. Despite this, everything seems to be in good shape, which the father comments on, and the mother suggests that perhaps the house had a caretaker. This movie is actually answering questions the audience might have, and not in a ham-fisted way. Are we sure this is a Paul Matthews movie? While all of this is happening, one of the fairies is watching the family. As the kids explore the house, they run into Malcolm McDowell, who grabs the kids and yells at them that they shouldn't be here. The parents step in and are rightly upset about their children being manhandled by a stranger in a house owned by a recently deceased family member. He says his name is Ian and he's the caretaker, and he backs down when the mother mentions that this was her mother's house. He is asked to leave by the father, played by Corbin Burnson, which he does, but not before warning the family that only death lives here. That was a terrible Malcolm McDowell impression, I'm sorry. As he walks away, he gripes about foreigners, which is odd, as the mother character is the daughter of the woman who'd owned this house, and she still has her English accent. I already mentioned that the character's name is Ian, but I will do what most YouTubers do when they cover a movie with Malcolm McDowell and just refer to him as Malcolm McDowell the whole time. While removing coverings in the house, the kids expose a suitably creepy-looking painting involving fairies and goblins, described by the children citing the grandmother's books as being wicked fairies, and the score of the film shifts to highlight that this painting is important to the plot. Once again, a level of filmmaking competence I am not used to seeing from a Paul Matthews movie. We're only about 11 minutes in here, though, so there's plenty of time to go sideways, but I think we may have stumbled into the best in set film for the season wrap-up already. Anyway, oh god, I say anyway way too much. Anyway, the mother finds the painting disturbing enough that she asks for it to be taken down, which no one complains about, even though the kids themselves had thought it was cool. The father tries, but it seems to be bolted to the wall. This gets quickly forgotten when the daughter, Evie, finds some wind chimes that look like fairies on one of the tables in the room, and the mother suggests hanging them up outside. Hereabout is where I run into my first big complaint about the movie that I can't excuse on the grounds of budget or technology available at the time. Well, it's two complaints, really, that overlap in this scene. The sound effects are needlessly loud, and no one has any peripheral vision in this family. The noises the fairy spying on the family makes are obviously meant for the audience, because realistically no one who wasn't hearing impaired would miss that. And that's fine, perfectly valid filmmaking technique. Not gonna knock its existence. I think the term for that is non-diegetic? Diegetic? I'm not gonna look that up. But it didn't need to be that much louder than the background noise. Especially when you have to watch the movie with headphones, because while your housemates can talk loud enough to be heard from the other end of the house with the door closed, you can't watch anything with speakers on that can only be heard from maybe 6 feet away. As for the peripheral vision, I don't know who was in charge of integrating the CG into the sequences where the fairy flies past the family, but it completely breaks suspension of disbelief that no one, especially the relatively tall adults, could fail to notice something that bright going right by them. I think I've mentioned issues with the lack of peripheral vision in these movies before, so I won't dwell on it too much here. Also, in all fairness, in real life sometimes I manage not to spot something I should have, though generally such things are not glowing and flying past my head. After the chimes are hung up and the kids have run off to play, the parents start talking, and the father suddenly begins coughing mid-conversation. Not wasting time getting to the sick parent subplot. A little clumsy on the reveal, but I have seen much worse. More fairies show up, and, well, using the word swarm makes it sound more menacing than it actually is, but it is the right word for it. They swarm around the kids. Less than 15 minutes in, and this plot is already moving along at a pretty steady clip. But this is a more than 90-minute movie, so I sense padding is in our future. The parents even see them from a bit more distance, but mistake them for fireflies. Were all the fairies glowing in one color, I could buy that, but hang on, let me do some quick research here. Okay, I stand corrected. With the exceptions of the ones that were kind of blue, the CG fairies we see on screen were in colors that fireflies can and have been seen in. Props to the movie on that one. Now, I think it says a lot about this season so far that getting the colors of fireflies mostly right counts as a victory. One of the fairies just lets Evie walk right up to her for some reason. She laughs, then flies off with Evie and Kyle chasing after her. They run into Malcolm McDowell again, who does more of this, this house has monsters in it, and you should all leave shtick, while the fairy messes with his tools behind his back. Later, when the kids are back at the house, we learn that the book from earlier was actually written by the grandmother who was reading it to them, and Evie references a promise to her to help save the fairies. Fairies who we see later basically gaslighting Malcolm McDowell by taking his stuff when his back is turned, and then putting it right back when his back is turned again. Admittedly, this is kind of funny in context. We get a few short scenes of the father and Kyle at the hospital, where the father's doctor looks less than optimistic once no one is looking at him, and the mother and Evie at a shop where people are staring at them through windows. Then we go back to the father and Kyle looking up information on the property they inherited, and a local priest is really snippy with them when they say the name of the property. When they leave, we see the priest phone someone, but we don't get any of the conversation. Before this, though, they did see something to suggest there had been a gold mine on the property, so they go looking for it, with the fairy we've spent the most time with so far, but who hasn't been given a name yet, observing them. Kyle eventually finds the entrance almost entirely submerged under a pond. Malcolm McDowell approaches the mother and Evie to apologize for having scared Evie earlier, but still insists that the area is tainted with evil. When the father and Kyle come back with a hose to try and drain the pond, he insists that if they open the mine, they'll free demons. The father doesn't believe him, of course. Soon after this, we get a sequence that turned out to be a dream sequence, but it didn't make it clear, so at first I thought it was the title character of the movie being woken up. Either way, the dude kind of looks like a 90s Power Rangers villain, and not one of the interesting ones either. It's not a terribly well done dream sequence. The reveal is too abrupt, slow motion gets used later than it should have, or definitely later than would have been effective, and the kid playing Kyle gives probably his worst line delivery in the entire movie up to this point. In the 30-plus minutes leading up to this, he sounded like a fairly normal kid. As far as I could tell anyway, I don't have children. I don't even like children. I'm vegan. The local constable shows up and seems pretty harmless. We get some standard Paul Matthews movie shenanigans that I'm not fond of, even when it's Malcolm McDowell doing it. The father and Kyle end up down in the mine. Later, the father has a coughing spell that causes him to fall over, and the doctor tells the mother he's got 2 to 3 months to live due to unspecified disease. The mom asks the kids to pray for a miracle, which the fairy who has been following the kids and messing around with Malcolm McDowell the whole movie overhears. Kyle has another nightmare about the mine and the title character of the movie. Evie falls down the mine and hurts her arm, which is healed by the main fairy, who still has no name or dialogue. I'm actually not sure if this is a good or bad choice or not. Plenty of films have chosen to not give a character a name for various reasons, but with this it's hard to tell if this was a creative decision or if this is just another case of Paul Matthews forgetting to put the character's name in the movie for most of the first act again. Anyway, Kyle tries to drum up help to open the mine and free the Fairy King to save his father. The townsfolk balk at the idea, which leads the constable of all people to deliver a speech to Malcolm McDowell and some pub patrons about being afraid of anything different. The constable is not originally from this town, so he doesn't hold to the same legends about the mine as everyone else, who all very much hope that Kyle and Evie's family leave sooner rather than later. A bunch of school kids chase Kyle on their bikes. It's implied that they were prompted to do this by a store clerk, which, way to enable bullying, you useless adult. A bit late in the movie to introduce bullies, but on the plus side, it means their time in the picture will be short, so I won't complain. They only end up hurting themselves, too, which almost got a laugh out of me. The needless slow-mo towards the end of the sequence kind of ruined it, though. Oh, come to think of it, there's our padding. I think that's 2 times I've referenced unnecessary or ill-timed slow motion. The father, despite having 2 to 3 months to live, has enough strength to help the children operate some heavy machinery to help reopen the mine to free the fairies. He doesn't actually believe them, mind you, about freeing the fairies, but he figures it's important to the kids, so he's humoring them, despite his wife's understandable objections. Later that same night, a group of fairies fly into the parents' bedroom right in front of the mother. They can't completely heal him, apparently only the Fairy King can do that, for reasons, but they do give him a boost, one that he sleeps through, funnily enough. That's not a complaint or anything, I just found it amusing. The mother ends up going down into the mine with the kids to help out. Malcolm McDowell accidentally sends the cart down the track where it almost plows into the family, but ends up opening the very passage he was hoping to prevent being opened by reflooding the mine. And by the way, it was accidentally. The way it was filmed, you could see him bumping into it and realizing that he'd goofed. Because he was messing around with the hose, not with the cart. Anyway, whether he knew they were down there or not is a bit unclear, as the film goes from the mother telling the kids she believes them now, while it's raining outside, to being completely dry outside with no transition. The townsfolk arrive en masse, led by Malcolm McDowell, to all try and fill the mine in and make the family leave. When Kyle gets trapped under some rubble, the townsfolk actively hold back the constable, the mother, and Evie, while the father tries to clear rocks away from the entrance. Of course, you know this is a work of fantasy, because in real life, cops will try to bust you if you roll your eyes at them, let alone grab their arms. And this cop was actually trying to be helpful. After much crying and begging from the family, and after Malcolm McDowell's dog runs into the mine himself, he is the first one to relent, taking his hands off the cop and going to help the father. I will say the music works here at setting the mood for this scene. Again, the bar is low for this season. So the father, Malcolm McDowell, and the constable manage to get Kyle loose before seeing something coming up a long vertical tunnel, and in a scene that looks like something out of a horror movie. The Fairy King enters the film properly at this point, coming out of the mine, and healing the father before transforming from looking like a 90s Power Rangers villain to more like the fairy we'd been seeing throughout the movie that was going back and forth between, like fairy-sized and human child-sized. And then the Fairy King shifts to be like fairy size, with all the other fairies, or perhaps I should say goblins, coming up out of the mine, turning into fairies now that they're free. Voiceover from Kyle tells us the father is completely cured and the family didn't have to move. The end. Literally, the last shot of the movie before the end credits are the words "the end" on the last page of the book from the opening before it's closed by a fairy. Though the words moved a little, I think, which means that they didn't actually write the end on the page, but added it in post. Not sure why they did that. Seems like a waste of computer effects, but whatever. We're done. By the way, in case you're wondering if the giants mentioned in the plot summary ever actually show up in the movie, they do not. But considering the budget they likely had, this is probably for the best. Random thoughts I had while watching the movie. During the intro, the grandmother's story mentions a giant that has the same name as the title character from The Last Leprechaun. That's actually kind of funny. To me, anyway. I swear, the girl who plays Evie just looks tired in some scenes. I'm wondering if a few child actor labor laws were bent to avoid being behind schedule. She's actually one of the better actors in the movie, though. There are some moments in this movie that, on their own, are fine, but are undermined by the whimsical music playing over them. Something more low-key, or maybe even no music at all, would have been the better choice there. The parents' names were Rob and Nancy. To be honest, I kind of forgot why I never bothered to call them that during the main section. Final verdict. This may be as close as Paul Matthews, who was the director this time around, not producer, has ever gotten to making a good movie. I mean, it's not on the whole, but I do have more positive things to say about it, in terms of sheer number at least, than about any of the other movies in the set so far. I do appreciate the choice to not have an actual villain per se, and have the people trying to stop the heroes of the picture acting out of fear and misunderstanding rather than malice. In the hands of a more competent filmmaker, this could have become a family movie classic along the lines of Neverending Story or Secret of the Kells. The biggest issue is pacing. Some things either take too long to happen or happen too quickly. Also, there are some things that, at least in my opinion, could have been explained more clearly when it comes to the lore of how the magical creatures work in this setting. Still, all told, the uncomfortable reality of Corbin Burnson's off-screen behavior being set aside as much as I could manage, and also I don't know if he's done anything like that recently. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's been doing a lot of those Christian movies lately, so maybe he became born again or something. I don't know. The guy was literally in a movie based on the Christian Mingle dating site. I still can't believe that thing exists. Anyway, setting that aside as much as I could manage, I could think of worse ways to spend 90 minutes. Well, more like 87 when you account for credits, but still. So, coming up next, we have a movie called The Little Unicorn, or as Diamanda Hagen called it, The Average Size Unicorn. You'll see why that's apt next time. I can tell you now, it's a major downstep from this one. Have fun, stay safe.